welcome to the Curious Minds podcast.
Proudly supported by Accelerating Aotearoa.
This is a podcast where we take a problem.
In our case, it's the poo problem here in Otara.
That's right, when it rains, it floods poo.
So our team designed an AI-driven self-flying drone called the Flying Taniwha.
To take photos of poop in the water when it rains.
So we can own our data, to show our lawmakers, to lobby for change.
We don't think it's good enough that our local waterways are becoming too polluted to swim in.
So this podcast is about finding small solutions to big problems by having conversations with influential people.
Hello everyone, welcome to episode 6 of the Curious Minds podcast. And today we have a very special guest joining us, Ed Clayton. Hello Ed, how are you?
Very good, thanks. Nice to meet you.
So I have a couple of questions here, and if you're okay to answer that, I would love to ask them to you.
Yeah, sure.
Alright, so my first question is, I understand you have more of a decade of experience working across public and private institution buildings and operating hydraulical monitoring networks. Can you tell me a little bit what it's like?
Yeah, so I started my first job outside of university was actually working as a transport planner for the Auckland City Council at the time. But after a year of that, I moved across and did sort of environmental monitoring work for the regional council. And so in the process of that, I was there for about 5 years, and that sort of merged into the super city at that time. And the roles that encompassed was sort of going out and preparing and collecting all the environmental data that feeds into things like the state of the environment, monitoring reports that go through to central government, things for resource consenting. So constructing networks of sensors for measuring rainfall, water level, water quality parameters such as dissolved oxygen and temperature, and all those other things that give us information on how good the quality of our water is.
Wow, okay. And it says here you are currently working towards your PhD investigating citizen science. What does that entail?
So that has come about really I'm about 13 years into my career now, and through the process of doing work for not just local government but also working for private companies, you get exposed to quite a number of different jobs and a number of different scenarios where there's issues with water quality, or there's going out and measuring things for projects. And after a while I just became quite concerned really that a lot of the monitoring work that we do is very expensive to do, and so it curtails the ability of people to go out and collect information that can be used. So by looking at citizen science, we start thinking about how can members of the public or school kids like yourself participate in gathering that sort of monitoring data. So my research in the PhD is actually building a low-cost open source water clarity sensor. And so that measures the clarity of water. It's based upon the Adafruit feather system, which is very similar to Arduino, and it looks at the transmission and attenuation of light and water. And the reason we're doing that is that the clarity of water has direct correlation to how much sediment is in there, how much organic content, and as we go through land use change, the more intensive dairying, the heavy pasture and so on that we have in a catchment, the amount of sediment and suspended sediment in rivers goes up. So measuring water clarity is an effective way of looking at what that damage is that we're doing to the environment. So my research there is about looking at how can we develop and provide tools for people like yourself, like school kids who might be studying technology and physics and computing, to construct these sensors and then potentially work in conjunction with community groups to actually go out and do that monitoring work. And then they have confidence that the data they collect actually has some sort of validity to it, and they can gather a lot of information that can be used to support things like state of the environment reporting, or to gather evidence for putting the pressure back on those in power to say, hey, we need to fix this stuff, it's not working the way that we want.
So as a school student, I know that you mentioned computing as one of the subjects that maybe I should take if I want to become a senior scientist. Are there any other subjects that you think I should take if I want to become a senior scientist?
I think it comes down to interest. If you're interested in these things, it goes a long way. And I mean, that's where you start thinking about the application of the study that you do to what it is you want to get out of it. So technology is great. I mean, it's not going anywhere. It's provided a huge amount of information in the last 20 years. The rate of data capture that we're getting and the knowledge that can come from that is incredible. I think for looking at hydrology and water quality as well, you probably want to have a good understanding of science. So you'd look at physics and water chemistry potentially, and biology and ecology if you're interested in sort of, the bugs and things that live in the streams. And, the presence of what lives in streams is often a very good indicator of how healthy these stream systems are as well. There's a range of things that you can do.
Wow. Well, you've given me some amazing intel for our little journey, and thank you for giving me an insight on what your
no problem.
On what your stuff is that you're doing. That's all my questions for now, from me. I'm sure one of my other hosts will come in and ask you a couple more questions. But that's it from me. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey Ed, do you sort of remember or know how your journey started in this career?
Yeah. So I grew up in Kaukopakapa, which is northwest Auckland, and out there, the beaches and the streams and the rivers are really accessible. My parents were both teachers at the local high school, and that had an influence as well on the sort of things that I was interested in. Physics and chemistry and science. Those were what my parents taught. But I think having those landscapes really accessible around me made me very aware of flooding issues, water quality issues when you couldn't swim in the local rivers. And then going through university, my undergraduate was something that wasn't, if everyone might say to you, you got to pick a career, you got to go to university, you got to study this, and it's going to be something that leads you down that path for the rest of your life. And to be honest, I don't think that's true. So don't put any pressure on yourself for that. But I went to the university, and my undergraduate was a pretty average undergraduate in science in terms of what it was that I did. I took a whole range of things. It wasn't until getting into a working career that I really started to get really interested in rivers and streams and the quality of those and what it meant for, being able to go swimming after it rains or not. And so through the work that I did, I became very aware of how land use affects water quality. And some of the things that come out of that is, obviously lots of people know that we can't go swimming at beaches and so on in Auckland after it rains. And I'm sure you guys are aware that's down to the amount of poos and stuff that comes out, right? Like there's cross-contamination between networks and all these sorts of things. But I think for a lot of people, the issue around that becomes sort of perceived as that's a marine water quality issue. We can't go swimming after it rains, so that's the beach as an issue, not that's our fresh water. That's the actual issue, because Auckland has a network of very small streams being so close to the coast. And through the process of urbanisation, we've buried a lot of them. And so when you put them in pipes and you remove people's ability to interact and observe with the natural water systems, it becomes out of sight, out of mind. And so people don't realise that the effects that they're having on the fresh water have those effects on the marine water receiving environment. So through the course of the work I've done, that's where I've sort of got to, is that realising that all of these sort of cumulative effects, the visible part of this for us is our marine environment, but we need to come back upstream effectively to look at our freshwater systems around what it is that we've done to those. How do we improve them? How do we go about, making all of these things visible and accessible to people?
And what impact do you think this will have further down the line if we don't do anything?
Well, it definitely won't get better, and there's a good chance it'll get worse. There's a lot of talk right now around housing, obviously in New Zealand, and where do we put people when we're building new housing? And we can't just keep expanding outwards forever in terms of the urban limits and sort of single housing and suburban sprawl. But at the same time, if we try and house all those people within the current area, we're going to lose a lot of the sort of people's backyards or those areas that act to infiltrate and slow down water and the movement through the system. So we need to be very careful around how we look at our housing and our urban infrastructure to make sure that we can actually accommodate the rainfall and the natural systems. So if we do that well, we could have an incredible, increase in water quality. But I fear that we're still not having quite the right conversations yet around how do we encourage people to change their behaviour, like, developers. How do we encourage developers to build so that it's a water-sensitive development, not just another slab of concrete laid down. And I think, the conversations that you guys are having here is a big part of that.
So what sort of insight do you have on the Otara streams?
Well, one of the streams I was responsible for monitoring when I worked at the regional council was the Otara stream. So I ran the monitoring station that's not far from here, just sort of up around the corner in the park. And so it was my responsibility to go and check the sensors to make sure everything was clean, to make sure we were recording accurate information. So I came to know at least that section of the stream quite well. And the thing that always struck me about Otara stream, and this was 10 years ago, so a little while ago, but is that none of the houses and none of the roads and none of the parks around the area faced the stream. So all the houses had their backs to the stream. And so there was no real interaction between people and the stream. So as a result, the stream felt quite unloved. Like there was nothing really going on. It was rubbish being thrown into it. There was nothing that sort of, no care and no sort of respect for that environment. So one day I was out there in summer and we had to sort of go around and do these things called low flow gaugings, which during the height of summer when the water level is very low, you go out and you measure not just the water level but the actual flow rate in the river. And that's really important because things that live in the river need a minimum amount of flow to move past to live and be healthy. So I was out there doing that and this local guy sort of popped his head over the bridge and he would have been, I don't know, in his late teens, I guess, and he started asking me what I was up to, and I told him that what I was there for doing, and measuring the stream and looking at the flow, and and he came down and sat next to me and chatted to me for half an hour, asking questions about what it is that I did, what it was that why we do this, and how could he potentially get a job or something doing something like that. So it was actually quite a rewarding experience because what it showed is that people want to know more about the streams and rivers in the area, except they don't really have the opportunity. Well, at least they didn't when I was doing that role. So I do think that is changing. The Otara stream, I think, has a bright future in front of it, especially if we look up towards the headwaters. So some of the development, while there is development going on up there, that's more likely to be better for the stream than some of the original development lower down in terms of water-sensitive infrastructure and so on that might be going in there. So I think the more awareness that gets raised around these urban streams, then the better the outcome. So, and part of that, as I said, is just making them accessible, making sure that people can get access to them, walk alongside them.
So you think making them accessible is a good way to get information out?
I think it makes people care about their environment more. And so if we let people access their streams and rivers, I think there's something very intrinsic around being next to water. And we all feel it in Auckland when we go to the beach. Everyone wants to do that. But being around fresh water has the same well-being that comes with that. And there are a lot of studies that show that the more access you give people to green space, so parks and nature, their mental health improves. And the same goes for blue space. So we're talking about beaches, lakes, rivers. Providing people that space in which to access nature is only ever beneficial.
Well, those are all the questions I have. Thank you for talking to
problem.
me. But yeah, I'm sure someone else will hop in and host. But thank you.
Cheers.
I heard from the start of our conversation was that you already were thinking of water sensors. My whole field is around the technology side of things. I'm a software developer, so when I heard bits and pieces, like yes,
awesome.
I love that sort of thing. So over your 13 years, you might have done a lot of research and you might have looked out to different countries. So is there any other countries who are doing the same sort of work, and have they developed sort of like the same sort of technology in terms of water sensors and cleaning, and what would they be?
Well, most of the technology we have for monitoring water is international stuff. So most sensors are purchased and brought into the country and so on. The low-cost stuff, and where it gets interesting, is quite a international movement. So there's a strong emphasis within some of the science community around open science and providing people the tools in which to go out and do this sort of work. The difference we have here, in that my research sort of looks at, is that generally, so, as we said, it's a water clarity sensor that I'm building. And the terminology is quite important because normally we measure water turbidity. But turbidity is sort of it's an arbitrary kind of thing. It's, when you say it's an NTU of turbidity, it's all dependent upon you measuring it to an expensive commercial sensor or a set of formers and calibration solutions, which don't really mean anything. So if people aren't familiar with turbidity and they say, oh, it's 800 NTU, it's, oh, okay, cool. What does that mean? But water clarity is something that's quite, useful, because it's I can see a meter into that stream, or I can only see half a meter. And where it becomes quite valuable for New Zealand is that we actually are now measuring the measure of fine suspended sediment in our streams in the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management is clarity now in the latest update. So it sets a range of what they call attribute states for how our streams have to sort of be judged in terms of good or bad. And then it says, well, this is the limit of clarity for this. And so, if it falls below that, you have to improve it. So it's quite a useful thing for us to look at. Now, I think going back to your original question around that sort of, the sensor technology and things like that, I think, the more and more we can make that technology work for New Zealand, the better. And I think that has to require, Māori input, Matauranga Māori into it. And I'm not Māori, so I'm not placed to lead that at all, but it's something that fascinates me. And there's, if we can look at how we can combine that, and, both systems can support each other in achieving those sort of common desired goals, be fantastic.
Yeah, it's a collaboration work. Normally, if you do it solo, it's hard to do. But if you get both our brothers, our Māori brothers, to work alongside with scientists, to be able to get that water flowing and be able to get some accurate readings of, like you said, clarity, it will basically be able to put a good picture out there to where we can go from here, and be able to change that image from here to into the future.
Yeah, it'll be a fascinating way to look at and understand the health of our streams and rivers in a better way. I think if we look at precedents here in New Zealand, going back to how the Whanganui River was given legal personhood, and now if we look at how we support that across our streams and rivers in Aotearoa, and then how we can bring technology to help give those rivers a voice, that would be a fantastic thing. Yeah,
it's amazing that you mentioned voice, because our first guest, Troy Brockbank, mentioned that we need to talk to our water, and that's vital, because then we can understand what's happening within our waterways. And it's just, you mentioned here, it puts some perspective of, we definitely need to get that through.
Yeah, I do know Troy, and I did watch some of the podcasts.
Hey.
So, yeah.
So that's cool. So with we have our own project that's going on. We designed a drone called the Flying Tangiwha. And it's basically sort of like the water sensor like you are making, where it looks at the clarity of the water and whatnot.
Awesome.
And then if it seems off, then we will collect. So the drone goes down, collects the water data, and we can analyze from the onwards.
Yeah.
So with that said, there is always the barrier of costs and availability of technology. If a community had to try to fund something like that, what would be your advice in terms of getting that through?
I think that's the key thing. Everything really comes back to how can you afford to do it.
Exactly.
And so there are a lot of, MB or Ministry of the Environment funds that you can apply for, but there's also local government funds that would be able to help with, community sponsoring for going out and collecting environmental data. But overall, I think that we still haven't valued that highly enough. So the funds that are available are great, but it's only a starting point. And, exactly. I'm, I guess, fairly lucky in the sense I haven't actually had to apply for any funding because this is the work that I do, sort of,
it's a passion
get paid to do it.
Yeah.
But, you're right. If we priced water and the impact we have on water in our environment properly, and then taxed those who polluted properly, then we should have plenty of money, to go around. But I think we're not anywhere near close to that yet. So,
I mean, when I look back, I think because I'm doing my own research about our waterways, and I'm going through archives of photos of what it looked like, and it looked gorgeous because children are actually literally dipping their toes in there and having fun with it. It's as the generation now, I feel like we're missing out that the whole glory past of being able to touch water, and it's sad, to be honest.
Yeah, you're right, and I think that comes down to as well as like I was saying earlier around how we aren't letting water be accessible, and the more we do that, then the more the emphasis will be on that we need to actually clean it up. We need people to be able to interact and go paddling in the streams and do all that. So yeah.
So I got one more question, which is I always ask this at the end with most of my guests, is that if you were given an opportunity to have a look at Otara's system currently, which you did way before days,
only 10 years ago.
Yeah. What is it that you would change about that system that's currently at the moment that's available, and how would you make that more efficient for those who are currently living here? In
terms of the way that we collect information, or
the way we collect the information, because it seems like we try to. Our group is trying to collect information. We always hit a wall with local council, and they're like, "No, that's not enough data."
Yeah, so local government can be an interesting beast. They have to collect information on streams in their area, and then they have to make it publicly accessible. But it's a very big but, is the way, how do they make it publicly accessible? So having a web page where you've got time series information coming through from a stream is one way, and a lot of them do that. But it also then requires some knowledge of what that information means when you're looking at it. Same thing goes for reading a report. Like, what is this report if it's saying, okay, this has been graded an A or a D or a... So I think there's some way yet to go that council, in terms of the communication of their data. But one thing that I'd like to see, and I do know that Auckland Council and their Healthy Waters Department have been doing some of this and reaching out. They are working with communities to provide communities with the tools in which to do some of the monitoring. So when communities can do the monitoring work, when they can gather the information and be the guardians of it, then that gives a sense of ownership and relationship back to local people and that water body. So I think what I'd really like to see is that local government would be funding communities to help go out and collect that information. So, and that could be through, direct payment to community groups, or it could be, and this is where, while it's not explicitly part of my research right now, it's hopefully something I'll get to post PhD. It's looking at how do you use young people and the skills they have, just like we have in this room, around, they're the digital native generation. I can't call myself part of that. I'm too old now. But, those are the sort of people who will be able to develop these low-cost monitoring tools, and then in conjunction with community groups, start collecting information around the state of these waterways. So, I think making that more accessible for people, it comes down to how you enable people and empower people to go out and collect that information to get them to participate, to let them participate in it.
Yeah, and you mentioned it earlier. It's all about that. It's all about that participation and being a part of it, so it can actually go through and work.
Exactly.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining our show. And where can we find you in terms of social media?
I'm on Twitter a bit. Probably have to reduce the amount of shit posting if you're following me, but I'm not really on Facebook too much or LinkedIn. So, but I'd love to know more about the work that you guys are doing. So, I mean, what platforms are you guys on?
We're on Facebook, so we're on a Facebook page called Accelerating Auckland, and there's Accelerating Aotearoa, and we also got a LinkedIn page as well. Perfect. Yeah, he's giving me the thumbs up.
Excellent.
So we're across the board on social media, and that's our goal, is to put on these podcasts and be able to put them through.
Excellent. Yeah, well, I'll look forward to linking these out through my Twitter account. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you.
And that is us for today, and I hope you enjoyed this episode.